This is Rumble, and I'm Michael Moore. This is Rumble with Michael Moore, and I welcome you to my podcast today. I want to just jump right into this because we are in day 6 and 7 of an event that we never thought we would see happen in this country when it comes to First Amendment rights. I do realize that we are coming to you during this weekend at the end of a brutal week in Minneapolis. And if you haven't had a chance to listen to my podcast about that, that I recorded on Friday morning, please listen to it. The episode's called Don't Be a Bystander. But today, we're going to talk about something, the three of us, that we have not spoken to you about all week since it happened on the 25th of May. This would be this past Monday, Memorial Day. And that is Planet of the Humans, this film that I executive produced, written and directed by Jeff Gibbs, produced by Ozzie Zehner, up for free on my YouTube channel, free of charge to everybody and anybody, has been viewed nearly 8.5 million times on YouTube. Became the instant documentary feature hit of 2020. I don't think there's any documentary feature that's been seen by that many people. If it had been in theaters, if the box office for 8.5 million people would be almost $100 million box office, which would make it the second largest grossing documentary of all time. So, but that we were going to do that in the fall. That's how we were going to release the film. But when the pandemic hit, and because we just couldn't wait any longer, the issues that we're raising in this film are so important. We decided to release it now, immediately, for free, so that everybody could have a chance to see it. And now you can't see it because of essentially an outside attack on the film. A company that we'll get into filed a claim against the film for 4 seconds in the film that they said was their copyrighted material. And of course we either get copyrights for the stuff we show of clips and music, or we fair use it. Our fair use laws in the United States allow us to use so many seconds of a film from another film or another documentary or whatever, news, in order for us to be able to tell our story, and to critique the things that we're critiquing in our story. So it's been now 6-7 days that we have been banned from YouTube because of this 4 seconds in the film. And I want to bring on my guests here today on Rumble. And they are the writer and director of Planet of the Humans, Jeff Gibbs, and the producer of the film, Ozzie Zehner. Welcome, Ozzie and Jeff. How are you?
Great, thank you.
Great, thanks, Mike.
Now, where are you guys? I'm recording here in the guest bedroom of my apartment.
I'm in San Francisco.
You're in San Francisco. Okay, and where are you, Jeff?
I'm in the woods of northern Michigan and looking out onto the patio, and I've got birds and some stray crickets.
Yes, that's what we're hearing, the crickets of northern Michigan.
The famed crickets of northern Michigan. People come far and wide to experience the crickets of northern Michigan and our water.
Oh, I'll tell you, the sound makes me homesick, frankly. I listen to that. Oh, I love that.
I think it's important to say, before we dive into what's going on with the movie, it's important to remind ourselves that we just learned, however difficult and under these circumstances that should not exist with the pandemic, we did learn that we can slow down, that we can live more locally, that we can, people are complaining, oh, it didn't make that big a difference in carbon dioxide emissions. Well, it made a difference. And that difference has only been made at other moments like this, during World War II, during the last recession. And that's a big part of why I wanted to make this movie is we've got to get a plan. And the plan we have now is not working. And, so unfortunately it took a pandemic to do this, but let's not forget this coincides with a period in which we are discovering that if we choose, we can change very quickly, not without controversy and not without difficulty. But so that's, I wouldn't have made this movie if I didn't have a lot of hope that we could change, a lot of despair that we're heading towards a cliff. And in fact, also the cliff is rushing towards us, but yet we're the humans for better or for worse, and we are capable of changing. So I just wanted to be clear about that. This is a movie, to me, as much despair as we might feel, I think there's some freeness with actually feeling it and talking about it, and the discussions that we wanted to bring up with the film that have been happening all around the world. Through that process comes hope. But that hope right now is being snuffed out. And it's ironic that the country's going to try to go back to normal, go back to our old ways. And the movie that says maybe we shouldn't be doing that, maybe the ways even of our own environmental side have not been working. The both is being sort of snuffed out at the same time, at least temporarily.
Why do you think that the film has done so well? I never expected 8.5 million people to be watching this feature-length documentary, especially in the middle of the pandemic. It just, it's not light entertainment. And yet, it just seems, the response has been overwhelming. The comments on YouTube, on social media, and whatever. And I'm talking about comments from just the people, the viewers, the people that have watched it. We'll talk about the so-called critics in a minute, but it's just. I don't. You guys must have some thoughts about why people have responded so passionately in favor of this film.
I think it's a built-up demand. It's like there have been people. The film is more than just one thing. The part of it that the film that has to do with the time we're in is so much more more profound than climate change alone. Climate change, of course, is an emergency, and of course could by itself do us in. But I think people sense that this is much bigger. We're in a much bigger story than that, and the story of our entire human presence and what's happening with this planet we live on. And I think people have been sensing, and many people have written about it. In fact, a couple guys from Google that were in charge of the renewable energy program there wrote an article several years ago saying, this is not going to save us. It's not going to work. And that just disappears.
This being what? This being what?
Renewable energy is not going to save us from climate change. And of course, it always contains a little bit of hopium in there. Like, maybe we'll invent something else, but all the existing renewable technologies are not going to do it. And then people go, maybe we'll invent something else, or maybe we'll have nuclear. But I think there's been a lot of, many people have had these same thoughts that we've had. It's just nobody's given voice to them. And you can see why people haven't given voice to them when you get attacked right and left viciously for daring to even raise questions. So I think my goal was to tell a story about things that you usually don't hear about instead of covering the same old talking points. And I think there's a desperate need for that, and a desperate sense that something is snapping and we're not on top of it. I don't know, Ozzie, what
we've gotten an incredible amount of gratitude from people. That's what I see in the comments on YouTube, and even after seeing people watch it physically, that seems to be the big response. And I think that because of that, gratitude for some different story, a different perspective that maybe they've been sensing. People say that oftentimes that they kind of knew something was up. They've kind of did some of the math themselves and figured it doesn't quite all seem to mesh, but it seems like a good direction to go in with developing renewable energy and having that be the forefront of the climate change movement. But I think people were putting together that it wasn't quite all checking out. This film brings a lot to light and helps people see why they had that feeling. And they have a lot of gratitude for that.
Yeah, a lot of people, they've written on my site and on my social media about they kind of had this inkling that maybe something wasn't right. Like, why weren't we winning? Why haven't we been winning the so-called climate battle? Considering we've done all these things, we've got all these solar panels and all these windmills, and we've got these electric cars, and we've done all this good work, and everybody is, I'm looking at this thing here, and the bottle, it says carbon. This bottle was made, it's carbon neutral, and so I think that you look at this stuff every day, and you keep hearing this, and you think things must be good, but the truth is we were told by one of the great leaders of the environmental movement, but we were told first by a brave scientist at NASA, James Hansen, who told us, I don't know how many years ago that was, when he said, if we go past 350 parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere, game over. There's no turning back from that. And we are at 417 parts per million right now. So if the game is over, if what we were told a decade or so ago is true, if we've screwed up, and even in spite of all of our hybrid cars and everything, we have not saved Earth. I mean, what I got out of this film, Jeff, from you and watching you make this over these years, is it's not that we've got necessarily the wrong answers. We're asking maybe the wrong questions.
Yeah. I was just thinking about the mountaintop removal for wind scene, and hopefully people have seen the movie, but if you haven't, you'll get to see it. But it's this is the problem with the media, the environmental coverage being controlled by people who have been captured by the dominant story and are entrenched in this. They want us to stay lost in the weeds about efficiencies and we're going to have this technology and that technology. Well, the reason that scene is in there, first of all, I didn't know what I was going to find when I went to visit Lowell Mountain and to see what they were doing in the name of installing wind turbines.
Is in Vermont, right?
In Vermont, Lowell Mountain, Vermont. Yep.
And when you say mountaintop removal, we know what that means with coal, but you're talking about to put up some wind turbines. What were they doing?
Yeah, so they basically had to blast off the tops of these mountains in Vermont and pile up the rubble to make a flat space to capture the wind. And people were devastated that these billion-year-old mountains were going to be crushed for wind turbines that will be up for 10, 20, 30 years, tear them down, maybe put up some new ones, maybe not. But that's affecting the habitat, it's affecting the water, and it's just affecting what's sacred to the people there. So that is not there because somebody, all the wind turbines in the world are required knocking the tops off mountains. It's a sign we've lost our way. That's what it's a sign of, that in order to get a win, a victory for clean energy, what we're willing to do. So it's an invitation to look deeper into our own psychology as we approach what I think is a time when we can no longer deny that collapse is real. And we can no longer deny that extinction isn't just a word for all these species we pretend to care about, but perhaps is a word that will be considered for the human race. And I know that sounds extreme, but there's a reason young people are using that word extinction and are active around this issue, because it's, if you look at the expansion of our whole human presence, this dramatic expansion that's happened in the last few hundred years, there's a possibility that's not sustainable. And many people believe, not just us, and I think this is another reason for the movie, and Ozzie, you probably have experienced this with your book, is that many people have sensed that this industrial civilization, especially at this level of consumption, and at almost 8 billion people, is impossible to sustain. And I think that's something that we've always sensed and talked about as environmentalists, but now we've moved away into this story of, technology is going to work it all out. Ozzie, did you have a sense too that when you were telling when you wrote your book, Green Illusions, that people weren't just taking it as a story about renewable energy, but it was a clue to some larger story?
It's a clue to this idea of productionism is going to solve the problem of human expansion overall and the human presence overall. And it's in many ways it's contradictory. And one of the ways we've gotten there, which is a subtext of the film, really is that we've allowed our science, the questions that we asked, we've allowed scientists to reduce the natural world to carbon dioxide measurements. And then we've allowed those carbon dioxide measurements to speak for the natural world, as if reducing carbon dioxide through renewable energy technologies is going to somehow save the planet. When we're switching from one form of side effects and negative side effects, fossil fuels, to another form of negative side effects through mining and additional, also still fossil fuels. And that's a big, big problem. And it's one that Planet of the Humans tackles head on.
But you're not saying that CO2 emissions aren't something that we should be concerned about.
No, not that there's something that we shouldn't be concerned about, but that they're a symptom of a larger underlying problem. And as long as we're just treating the symptoms, then the problem is that we're basically putting Band-Aids on a problem.
So how would you describe the overall underlying problem, the overarching problem here, I guess is maybe the way to put it, that we're not talking about? What are we not talking about?
Well, what we're not talking about is what we see in the historical segments of Planet of the Humans, the whole first third of the film. I don't want to ruin it for people who haven't seen it yet, but this is the section of the film that basically exposes how the basic technical limitations of green technologies have remained unchanged over time, despite technological development. And so in the end, these technologies are revealed just to be another planet-destroying profit center. And that's not flattering. And that's what the critics don't want you to see or to even think about.
It's like there's a lot of big turnarounds in this because we've kind of all been lulled into thinking that there's such a thing as kind and gentle technology. This phone doesn't look so damaging, does it? It's nice. It's a little bit innocent. And, my new electric car, it looks kind of innocent. And that solar panel sitting there, it looks sort of harmless. And, we've been sold this story that we can have our technology and our advancements at basically little or no or ever lesser cost to the planet. And the reality is that even if we did have zero carbon technologies, that they're going to come at a profound cost to the earth. And there's no technology that doesn't require heavy duty industrial processes, that doesn't require smelting and mining. It's invisible to us, but right now there's a whole new round of exploitation of native peoples, of people of color, of poor people, indigenous people around the world, especially in the Southern Hemisphere, to produce all of these things, all of these technologies that we all currently enjoy, including the microphone I'm talking into and this interface and the computer, all of this stuff. And so green energy is just part of that story. And what are we going to do? Go cut down some grass and, so all of this stuff comes from these profoundly, it comes at a cost to the earth, and it's all due to ramp up. I was just looking today. There's a report that says the next wave of mining is going to be to mine the oceans. Thousands of square miles are just going to be scraped clean. And then plumes of things with like mercury and lead and sediment are going to just waft through the water hundreds of miles. We've only recently discovered there's all this life at the bottom of the ocean. And, when are we going to have an off switch? When are we going to say enough is enough? Oh, but we're going to recycle it. Well, the movie is an invitation to do your own research. They got these new technologies. We're going to recycle it. So it's going to be, just a circular economy. Well, go ahead and look up aluminum recycling, and you will see that it's a toxic process that uses way less energy than mining aluminum, but it still requires a lot of energy and has some toxic things that are very difficult to dispose of. And some of the technologies don't allow you, the aluminum that you produce from recycling is not as pure, and oftentimes as what you mined. Steel, look up steel recycling or metal recycling, and you'll just see dozens of things will pop up for these toxic issues that come up, and vast amounts of energy. And where are these recycling operations? Where poor people live and people of color. So, we're trying to find an escape hatch that doesn't exist, rather than accept that we're a single species on a finite planet that's hitting limits. The definition of insanity is just to keep going with that, until once collapse is so clear that nobody can deny it. It's going to be very hard to pick ourselves up and change direction.
Well, it's going to be too late.
That's another way of saying it.
Well, I already feel like it's too late, frankly. And I'm well aware of, just in the films I've done over the years, is that people can't see when it's too late because it doesn't look like it's too late. Like you said, I'm looking at this iPhone sitting here on the table, and, Jeff, it is quite lovely, and it's got a flashlight. It doesn't have a Swiss Army knife on it, but it does have a flashlight and other useful things. And I'm glad I've got it right here. But I remember when I was making my first film, Roger Me, General Motors, about General Motors and Flint. And everybody's like, why are you upset? It made $4 billion last year. It's the richest corporation in the world. There's 50,000 jobs still here in Flint. We lost 30,000, but we still had 50,000. And I just kept hearing this over and over from people. And I just kept saying, I'm going to tell you something. This is going to crash and burn, this thing you call General Motors. And industrial America really along with it, because it won't be just General Motors. And, I remember going through this when the film came out, and everybody was like, he's just putting out all this stuff to get everybody all hot and bothered, and nothing's going to happen. The auto industry is fine. And it looked fine, except within 19 years, it wasn't fine. And over that period of time, when I couldn't get anybody to talk about this, it got to the point where General Motors crashed, and the U.S. government had to bail it out along with Chrysler. And it looked bad then. Then it kind of looked bad. It's like, oh, shit. And so I have experienced this a number of times with my own films, where I'm trying to get people to pay attention. Things don't look that bad as I'm trying to say they are in the movie.
Well, let me just answer that. Yeah. And I'll just be honest about this. First of all, Ozzie, you worked in the factory in Flint, right?
No, I started out in Kalamazoo. Yeah, I worked
Kalamazoo. Okay, you worked in a factory, but you lived in Flint for a while.
Yeah,
I grew up in one of the roughest neighborhoods of Flint. I mean, the dirt streets you see in Bowling for Columbine, that's my neighborhood. It was quite something back then. We'd turn on the tap and brown stuff would come out, once a week or so, and I think we've seen a version of the end of the world, those of us who are from Flint. And I love the things that have been happening there that are, where people have been making a go of it and doing good. But, through our lifetime, we've seen the collapse of an industrial civilization, a miniature version of that. And we've seen people poisoned, hundreds, maybe tens of thousands, 100,000 or more people poisoned just recently by the water issues. So let's say that it is too late. Let's say that we are headed off the cliff. Well, I actually have hope and don't think that's the door is closed, but let's say that that's true. People need to know that we're being bullshitted and plastering the planet with 1 million square miles of wind turbines and 600,000 square miles of solar panels.
600,000 square. Just so people understand what Jeff's saying here is that the so-called environmental leaders, they all subscribe to the theories of this is the Stanford professor, I think.
Many subscribe to the theories of Mark Jacobson from Stanford. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Not all of them, but many of them do. And basically what he says is that it's possible to replace all fossil fuels and all this with 100% renewable, 100% solar and wind. And then, well, tell the story. Some scientists decided to do a review, a study of his facts.
Yeah, I'll say my part of it. And
okay,
the flaw in that whole thing was because of the intermittency, because of the lack of storage, because of the impossibility of doing storage on a global scale like this. He had slipped in the idea we would increase the hydroelectric, just in the United States for our needs, by 12 times. 12 times. That's the equivalent of 1,000 large fossil fuel or nuclear plants running full blast. That was what the critics said that was a flaw in his theory. So he slipped into this, something that was impossible, because he knew that solar and wind alone couldn't do it. And I'm just sitting there going, that doesn't make the news. I mean, there were a few news reports, but is that what you found, Ozzie? Is that there are people who have found some of the same truths we have, but it never catches fire. It's almost like you can't question the green religion.
It's not nearly as exciting. And yeah, we have this. It's a religion that we're all kind of trapped in. And the film is very much on the front edge in the way that this doesn't get reported as much. For the reasons that we've found out trying to release this film, you get accused of all kinds of things if you go forward with reporting, and it's understandable that people are having a hard time kind of grappling with some of the facts in the film or some of the realizations in the film because it is so new. And getting back to Jacobson, it is the Ivanpah, for example, that you see in the desert, the giant solar installation that we're go out and visit. His plan calls for thousands of those to be built. And the thousands of those that will be built are just to serve 7% of our energy needs. But we're on a planet where just in the past couple years, we've expanded our energy requirements so much that the expansion in the last couple years of fossil fuel use has basically is the equivalent of all of the solar cells and wind turbines that we've ever created, ever, all combined. Just our expansion in a couple of years wipes all of that out. So how can we possibly catch up?
Well, the flaw was that he said that we can somehow put more, get this without having to build more dams. And, there's no way you could build 12 times more dams that already exist. So that was the flaw. And when his own peers, several scientists, called him out on this and wrote their own paper, he actually sued them and tried to censor them and tried to get them to retract it. He wound up withdrawing that lawsuit. But this level of this is why it seems to border on a religion to me, or maybe actually is a religion. First of all, Mark Jacobson and most of our critics are involved with either funding from, or they stood up there with investment bankers. Some might call it hedge funds. I don't know what the actual definition is, but people that want to raise billions and trillions of dollars for this. And so once you put that stake in the ground
and make a profit off it,
they are going to make I'm not saying Jacobson or even Bill McKibben or whoever's
going to hedge funds.
Well, once you get into, those guys are going to make a profit from it.
Green energy funds.
And once you set yourself up as our savior, I've got this plan to save us. That's, I think you get into some strange territory. But, Ozzie says in the film something that's been controversial to some people, that we'd be better off burning the fossil fuels directly rather than playing pretend. And some people go, "Oh my God, how could you say that?" It's like,
yeah, Ozzie, why did you say that? I'm serious.
Yeah, that's a good question. And again, we're coming back to this issue of this film being on the front of an edge that has not really been explored very much. And so the one thing that we would expect is the idea that we have in our heads is that when we spend, a certain amount of energy to build one of these arrays, then we get many times that much energy back. And if that were the case, that, it would be great. And these would also be wildly profitable, because if you can take one, Gala apple down to the market and get a bushel of Gala apples back, then that's a really good deal. But what happens when you start to look into it is the money doesn't really lie when it comes down to it. And what we see is that if you want to build one of these plants and run it for its whole lifetime versus a conventional power plant, it costs 3 times as much. And so then the question is, well, the sun is free. Sunlight is free. So why is the Department of Energy saying that it's $240 a megawatt hour for solar thermal versus just $75 for conventional gas plant? Both of these are built and fueled using industrial commodities. So their lifetime generation costs roughly end up boiling down through the materials and labor and so on into the fossil fuels that were ultimately used to create and operate them over their lifespans. And so if solar thermal plants like Ivanpah are yielding that net energy, then they should be much less expensive than fossil fuels that are used to make them and operate them, not 3 times the cost. And so that's the kind of one of the first keys that things aren't quite adding up. And even if we did pull that off, as long as it's powering growth and being sucked up by the growth monster, it would presumably just lead to more habitat loss, not less, and more fossil fuel use over time and not less. And so when I stood in the Mojave Desert and Planet of the Humans and said, we'd be better off burning the fossil fuels directly rather than playing pretend, it wasn't because I'm pro-fossil fuels. It's because the evidence shows that we are essentially just fooling ourselves and doing a great deal of destruction in the process. And ultimately, there's no such thing as clean energy. There's just a thing as less energy. And that's the story we need to be in.
So I get that about this Ivanpah facility. You show it very clearly in the movie. But do you believe that for all renewable forms of energy that we'd be better off? Just because we all know we're going to run out of fossil fuels. We know what it's done to the atmosphere. So to say something like that, I think it scared people, even people, they love the film, but they've written to us and said, is that really what you meant?
Many people have also written and said, thank God somebody finally said this. And it gets back to what you said before. The question, would you rather have us burn fossil fuels, has a bunch of implicit assumptions which are incorrect. You're assuming that by operating Ivanpah, that as that generates electricity, that somehow it's causing us to close a fossil fuel plant. You can't just put up an Ivanpah and close a fossil fuel plant. So it's not even a fair comparison. Secondly, you're discounting all of the damage and destruction that's being done to create Ivanpah or any solar facility or large wind facility that's now an additional on top of the fossil fuels. So yes, if in some magic universe you put up solar panels and suddenly you weren't burning fossil fuels, I'd love that. That's not the reality. And so even asking the question doesn't even make any sense, because nowhere in the world is solar and wind deployed and they shut down all the fossil fuel plants, all the nuclear plants. Hooray, they're gone. You can have models and projections, but in the real world, that's not what's happening.
So like I said, you think it's the wrong question that's being asked. So
wrong question. And
what would be the right question?
The right question is, when are we going to come to understand that we're hitting limits? And we need to slow down and back up and put it in reverse. It's coming to understand that there's no magic technology, whether it's nuclear, renewables, or fossil fuels, if you believe in the infinite fossil fuel theory, that's going to keep this industrial civilization at this level of consumption going. It's headed towards the cliff, people, and the cliff is now arriving. Mm. And so we've got to come to grips with that, or we're just going to continue to go off the cliff. But I'd like to, if I may, do you mind if I answer that? Because I didn't know Ozzie that well when we were in the desert there, when he said that. And he has his reason. And the reason I accepted that was my own list of things, starting out with the fact that you don't get to close down a fossil fuel power plant, as you hear the actual experts charged with making the grid work in the film say. But here's why I think it's a plain pretend. So first, you had to spend all the fossil fuels, all the mining, all the destruction around the planet It takes a globe's worth of mining, smelting, and processing and fossil fuels to create anything like Ivanpah or a solar PV array or wind turbine array. So then you have to alter and clear 5 square miles. You see that 500-year-old yucca plant being carved up. And then there's the endangered species. The desert tortoise that used to live at Ivanpah has seen a 90% decline since 1950. They found 770 at Ivanpah, adults and juveniles, and moved them to what effect I've heard that many or most of them died. Then you think about the mining that went into this. Mining already is 10% of global energy emissions. 10%. Some people feel like the desert sequesters, some scientists say that the desert sequesters carbon. That's been diminished. In the Amazon, mining is already the top deforester in part of the Amazon, and 10% of the destruction of the Amazon is because of mining. Then you've got the transmission lines and the substations that you have to build for solar arrays that are far away from where they're received. Transmission lines have a tremendous environmental impact and a tremendous amount of resources. You have the built-in natural gas plant, then you have the baseload coal, nuclear, or gas running in the distance to keep the whole system stable. Then you have the fast-reacting gas plants for when it becomes dark or the wind just drops off. And then they're saying, oh, we're going to interconnect to all the solar and wind. So then you're going to have other solar and wind arrays that supposedly are balancing this out. So this just becomes this ever more complex system that still doesn't escape natural gas. And if you don't take my word for it, this is a quote from PV Magazine. Energy storage.
What is PV Magazine?
Photovoltaic Magazine.
So this is like an industry
magazine. Energy storage is not enough. A renewables grid needs flexible gas backup. Or how about this from the Washington Post? Turns out wind and solar have a secret friend, natural gas. Because these sources of electrical generation are intermittent, there has to be some means of continuing to provide electricity even when they go dark. And the more renewables you have, the bigger this problem can be. James Hansen, who we mentioned earlier as the scientist that helped break climate change. I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but he said, basically, the more renewables you get, the bigger problem you have with intermittency. And that's why he's a fan of nuclear. And right in the middle of the Ivanpah scene, you see Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who's, I believe, connected with BrightSource, one of the company that built this, and investments in Ivanpah, admitting to oil and gas industry insiders that you're going to need gas plants to make all this work. So to me, all this shouting and censoring and flailing around is meant to distract people from what you see in the film. And we went great pains to actually go places to show you what's happening rather than to think about models or projections or, so that's why I was okay with, and that's what came to my mind when Ozzie said we'd be better off burning the fossil fuels than playing pretend because of all this additional rounds of destruction, fossil fuels, this desperate attempt to make anything work, rather than face reality that we're hitting limits.
And when you say hitting limits, explain that. What limits?
Limits, fossil fuels are not going to last forever. And even if they do, burning them at this level is destroying us. And the only way to burn less of them is actually this thing called burning less of them. The purity of the ores that we're mining have been going down and down. These materials are not going to last forever. Right now, we're in a biodiversity collapse. There's 1 million species that are endangered, according to the UN. And they say, we've used one study showed that most of the major aquifers in this planet that we draw water from for our cities and for agriculture are being over depleted. Half the topsoil in recent decades, I think over the last century or so, is gone. 90% of the large fish in the ocean, according to one study, are gone. According to another study, 75% of insects disappeared in 27 years. We've all seen that, right? You remember that? We used to have carry an extra bottle of windshield wiper fluid just to drive across Michigan.
Yeah,
in the summer.
That's true.
Doesn't happen.
If you were driving from Flint up to the northern part of the state, you'd have to like pull over every hour at a gas station to get the squeegee out because there'd be so many dead bugs on the windshield. You drive now from Flint up north, there's hardly a bug that hits the windshield. It's like, where did they go? Things like this happen and nobody ever notices it. You've never had a conversation with anybody complaining about what happened to the bugs on the windshield. But we get these little tells, these little signs, and this is what people are now, I think, aware of what's happened to the honeybees, what's happened to other things that that we used to see a lot of, and now they've starting or have disappeared.
There's toxic algae rising all across the world, and climate change is a factor. One of the biggest factors is all the runoff and pollution from agriculture, and from industry, and from cities, but especially agriculture. So there's just so much to talk about that the movie was meant to trigger. There was a 2016 UN study called The Ravages of Guns, Net, and Bulldozers. Biodiversity, The Ravages of Guns, Nets, and Bulldozers. The authors of the study published in Journal, they found that this study that was published in the journal Nature found that agricultural activity, overexploitation were the two largest threats to biodiversity and to species extinction on Earth. Urban development, invasion and disease, invasive species, pollution, system modification like dam building, and climate change. But their concern was that we're overly focused on climate change when right now all the expansion of all things human around the world are destroying species by species, acre by acre, the habitat that things require to live in. And also hunting and fishing, surprisingly, shockingly, are still highly involved with extinction. So that's why I made this film, to get these discussions going. And, and it's been cut off. It's extremely unfortunate. And then, unfortunately, I think it's a symbol of the time we live in which the right has clearly lost their mind, clearly. And you can see the hate that's been happening this week, the horrible things that have happened. But we need to own how maybe we've lost our way. And some of us, I'm afraid to say this, some of our environmental leaders have really lost their way and are trying to shut down a movie that contains truths and that they don't want you to hear.
Jeff, Ozzie, let's get into why the viciousness of the attacks on this film. It seems like, listening to you, I can understand why a lot of them are upset, because you're going contrary to the story that they want to tell. It's a story that they get a lot of funding from various foundations. They are able to sell books. They're not willing to have a discussion with anybody who might want to say, hey, it doesn't seem like this has worked all that well. Maybe we should all sit down and come up with a new plan, a new strategy. I think you listen to enough young people, you hear their anger about why these old people, us, are still calling the shots of this movement and not really having a new idea, just keep saying the same old thing. But something in this film, I've never seen anything like this in terms of it triggering. It's like literally we had come after people's children or something. It's the defamatory nature, the slanderous nature of what they've called you guys, what they've called me. It's like, at first I was just laughing at it. And then it's like, wow, I did not realize that this film would expose that some of the people, the academics, the scientists, the political leaders of this movement, some of them are batshit crazy. I had no idea. I mean, I've been really shocked at how unglued and unhinged they are over this film.
For me, I feel like it's. I'm curious to see what you guys think about it, but it almost feels like one of those Rorschach ink blot tests. You know, the ink blots that they show you, and they ask you what you see in them. And since the release of the film, I kind of feel like the film is acting like one of those. And as we're all sitting at the end of the film, like looking into the abyss. I mean, for people who've watched the film, you know what I mean. But I think people kind of read into it their own concerns and yearnings and fears. And in this case, the critics have claimed that the film advocates for any number of things that it doesn't, like coercive population control, genocide, nuclear power, both for and against, classism, fascism, racism, a return to the Stone Ages. And I think that may just be because something very fundamental to our idea of growth and expansion and well-being is being unsettled. And that might be part of it.
What do you think, Jeff?
It's very disturbing to see the attacks because we went to great pains knowing that there would be some controversy, not expecting this kind of just, over the top response. But, I don't make much comment about anybody in the film. I do have my opinions, but you hear environmental leaders, Bill McKibben, Al Gore, you hear Michael Bloomberg going, we're going to make another X $1 million investment in the Sierra Club. You hear Al Gore praising capitalism. You hear them in their own words. And it's kind of freaky to have people then take my movie, our movie, and recut it and to take things out of context to say words that aren't even in there. We never say population control. We wouldn't say population control. I hate the concept. I thought that, and I think a lot of people can get this from watching the movie, I thought I would make a contribution by never mentioning population without mentioning consumption, especially in the Western world. It's the first film I know of, and that ties in population growth with consumption, and then shows that consumption is this tremendous exploder of that, and that it's all tied into industrial civilization and capitalism. I thought all throughout the film, you'll hear this various language, a single species. How long do you think we have, we humans? Our total human impact, all the human caused changes to the planet. This film is a holistic look at who we are as a species, told through the story of a misguided environmental movement that took a wrong turn and started to believe that technology from industrial civilization, the thing destroying the planet, could save the planet. It's a story of the humans told through that very specific story. It's like War and Peace is not really about, we don't even remember what the war was. It's about the human condition and war in general. So to have that be singled out and put in hateful ways by people who their own activities are proposing are going to have mining and exploitation around the planet to make their green energy come true. It's just mind blowing, and people that should know better. And I don't know how much of it's ego, like this is our environmental movement, you guys from Flint, butt out. And I don't know how much of it's, frankly, I hope there are some journalists that still exist in this world. How much of it's the money? Because as you see in the film, committing yourself to raise $40 to $50 trillion to generate the political will. And Al Gore, Bill McKibben sat on the stage with that billionaire. I didn't make him sit there. We didn't have to look for that footage. It was just there. We didn't make Al Gore say use capitalism. We didn't make Al Gore lobby for biofuels for sugarcane ethanol in front of Congress. We didn't make Al Gore start an investment fund to profit from all this. This is the story we found when I asked the question, maybe I should look into the money. And we still don't know the answer to that story. But one thing I do know is we're not talking about people that have got $5,000 from some foundation to just keep afloat. We're talking about the whole illusion that some of these groups are grassroots being shattered. 350.org, I don't think they just started out with a bunch of volunteers, strictly. Maybe that's partly true. But from day one, I think there was some big money involved. Ozzie, I'm trying to remember.
Well, it started out as the brainchild of the Rockefeller Foundation with One Sky, and then they merged with 350. And Bill McKibben was on the board of One Sky, and there was a very large amount of money, millions of dollars spent to merge the two together and bring them forward. I mean, just in the last 5 years, 350 has brought in donations of around over $66 million from foundations. And keep in mind that these foundations are part of the Environmental Grantmakers Association, and their boards of these foundations are principally bankers and industrialists. We have this idea that, maybe there's some like wealthy Rockefellers sitting around with their flannel shirts on in a lodge, just really concerned about the environment. But the people who are on the boards of these foundations are bankers and industrialists.
Yeah, this is the part they don't want you to know. They don't. That's why when you see Bill McKibben is asked in the film, so where does your money come from? And he's fumbling all around and I don't, well, it's, there's something from what's it called? He's trying to remember the name. And then he's asked about the Rockefellers. Oh yeah, that's right. We got some money from the Rockefellers. He doesn't even, and he says, where does our money come from? Well, what money we have is what he says. And it's like, so, went and got the 990s, and I think the last reporting year that they reported, something like $19 million that they took in at 350.org. And for the 5 years before that, it was something like $66 million. Where's that money coming from, and what's it for? It's what don't we have a right to ask that question? It's not a knock on him or even 350 and the good work that they do. It's just that something isn't right with what we call our movement, our environmental movement. And if we've done all this work and got all this renewable stuff going, how have we gone from below 350 parts per million to 417 parts per million as of now? How has it gotten that worse? So, Jeff, I'm, about the money that these groups take in. What's going on with all that? Because if we're going to follow the money here to try to figure out what's wrong with our environmental movement, I think these questions have to be asked.
They have to be asked. And, one of the things that never comes up is the whole divestment part of the film and then reinvesting in these green sustainable funds. And then you see that they contain, mining and chemical companies and banks and logging companies that do biomass. And still, even as of the release of the film, they contained logging companies that do biomass. So I was hoping that some people would be inspired to look into all of this besides us. But my biggest concern, again, Al Gore is clear about trying to profit from this. Never accused Bill McKibben of personally profiting from this. I have no idea what his personal investment life is, or even if he has one. But the main thing is when you get into bed with people which are making a profit, do they change or do you change? And do they constrict the story that you're telling? I know that Al Gore and Bill McKibben have both talked about many of the things that are in the movie, but the movement got constricted to climate change is the thing and the only thing, and renewables are our savior. That's been the centerpiece of everything. And I just think once you get into bed with people when trillions of dollars are at stake, it changes you. And I have a hunch that some of the money that is behind this is connected to some of the bile and angst that we feel. And I hope that comes out. What do we know about the person that's helped to get this film off YouTube and his group?
Well, we know that their group, their organization, their company, I don't know what it is, have received money from the same people that fund 350.org. Just a very quick check. It took about a day to see what's the money behind this and what are the connections. And it turns out that this company in Britain that is behind this taking down the film and preventing people from seeing it. They've been a paid consultant for The Guardian. Now, The Guardian, after giving us a very wonderful 4-star review by their film critic in the entertainment section, The Guardian has attacked this film in their news section, in their opinion section, pretty relentlessly. And it turns out that the people behind the takedown of this film have conducted workshops and things like that for the staff at The Guardian as to how they should cover climate change. And you start to see all the interconnections between, they get the same money that Bill McKibben gets from the same Rasmussen Fund. They work with The Guardian, who's, is part of this climate desk organization with these other publications that they've all committed to covering climate change in one particular way, not considering any other things that should be discussed and not allowing other voices. We have submitted 2, if not 3 op-eds to The Guardian. They will not publish an op-ed from us. They will only.
That's a good point. People think that maybe we're not responding. We've
been trying to respond.
A lot of time.
I mean, and that's not just The Guardian. Newsweek ran an op-ed from one of these so-called climate scientists. We wrote an answer to that. They wouldn't publish it. Common Dreams, this liberal website that publishes just about everybody and anything, they've run 3 pieces against this film. We wrote something for them. They said, no, we won't publish it. It's been nonstop. They not only have taken the film down and silenced our voice, so-called liberal media will not publish what we write, even when we're just trying to respond to the things that they've said. There's a huge clampdown. And that should make everybody not only pretty nervous about the state of our press these days, but also it speaks volumes about what they don't want you to know. They don't want you to see this film. They don't want you to consider what we're saying. They don't want to face us down in the great debate. They just want to attack, smear, slander, recut the film and then put it up as if that was the scene. Tell the public that this film is saying this or that. See, this is the mistake. If I were advising them, it's like, don't tell the public that the film says something that it doesn't say, because they're going to go watch the film for free on YouTube. And then you know what they're going to think of you? You're a friggin' liar. You're a liar. And they're going to not listen to you in the future. You've hurt your cause deeply by trying to smear this film, by making things up about this film. And when we go back on, and we will go back on, you will be able to see this film very shortly. They won't be able to stop us.
And can we talk about some of those lies that they've gotten away with?
Yes, please.
Like, somehow we singled out and said that solar panels are only 8% efficient. That's old data. Well,
yeah.
Anybody who watches documentaries know that they're filmed over a period of time. And, I made no claim that, this is what every solar panel in the world is. It's just what I happened to find at the one place where somebody mentioned the efficiency of the solar panels. But, those happen to be thin film solar panels. You can see it right in the movie. They're flexible. They're cheaper and they're easier to install. And lo and behold, if you look up, I found an article about Tesla rooftop solar panels, flexible ones. And this industry expert calculated that the efficiency, depended on how you measured it, came out to 4% to 10%. So let's just say 10%. So the Tesla solar panels right now that are of the same general type are 10%, and the ones in the movie that were flexible were 8%. I never expected people wouldn't do their own research. It's just getting at the basic point that these things are not, they're not 100% efficient. And even if they were, I mean, Ozzie, if they were 100% efficient, we'd all be saved, right? That would just be.
Well, the problem is that there's theoretical limits to increasing efficiency very high. But even at the time that those were installed, they could have installed 16% efficient solar cells. They were available then too. And but they would have cost twice as much. So the utility would have been able to afford half as many of them, and they would have the same production. So that's why the efficiency is an issue that's not even.
So when they say that you filmed this 10 years ago, these guys with their solar panels at 8% efficiency back then, that many of the new solar panels today are still around 8 to 10%, and that I love the attacks that say, oh, it's no longer, he's got old footage, it's no longer 8%. These solar panels are now 16%. And I'm like, 16%, that's it? That's all in these 10 years since you started making this film? That it's gotten to it's at 16%. And now you're telling me, well, there were some that were 16% 10 years ago. There's been no accomplishment here. You wouldn't, if your cell phone was only 16% efficient, would you be using that cell phone? Would you be using anything that was 16% efficient? The way that these whoever these people are that say there are environmental movement, that where they just make this stuff up and then talk about it like it's a good thing that hey, yeah, no, we're at 16% now.
Or 20, they're saying they're 20, 16, 18, 20, 22%. There are some solar that are 30%. But now we've wasted some time buried in the weeds of what technology is going to bail us out. And my position is, even if somebody came down from the sky and gave the humans infinite free clean energy, oh, look, nuclear, infinite free, somehow we don't have waste problems. We don't have mining problems. We don't have, we don't have to use millions of tons of concrete to build nuclear plants. That unless we humans come to grips with that we're hitting limits, we're still doomed. It doesn't matter what energy source we use to power ourselves.
Because of our consumption.
Because of our consumption and our continued growth, and the fact that we've already blown past many planetary limits. I mean, we hear that by October we've exceeded our planetary boundaries. Well, there's a lot of critics who say that that's way too nice. I mean, that we've blown past the planetary boundaries each year way sooner than that. I think.
What does that mean? Planetary boundaries.
In other words, we're using way more resources than can be replaced by our living planet, and so that's only being sustained by this giant plume of fossil fuels, this giant plume of oil and natural gas now that's displacing the coal, that's keeping this game running. But the living planet cannot support this level of human presence. But just to go back to the 8% thing for a minute, it's even worse than that, because let's say that they were 100% efficient. They're intermittent, and they only produce energy part of the time. And
in Michigan, it's 13% on average.
So what that means is that 87% of their capacity. You can explain it better, Ozzie. I mean, the capacity factor.
Yeah, so there's a lot of reasons, and it can do with anything from the sun angle to dust or haze or rain or hail or heat or nighttime. There's a lot of time that solar cells are producing much below their capacity. They never really reach their capacity ever, except for possibly in the middle of the day in a desert. And so on average, in Michigan, it's 13%. Globally, it's under 20%. And so what do you do the other 80% of the time? And it's also not dispatchable. You can't just use it when you need it. It just comes when it comes. And so then you introduce storage. and you have to have a battery system or some other kind of system to store the energy for when you need it. And then that, of course, now you need another layer of mining and resource extraction and fossil fuel use, which is why all of these are so expensive, and also why, after spending $1 trillion on these technologies, they don't even equate to the amount of increase in fossil fuel use that we're experiencing in just a couple of years.
So that is that gap. In California, I think it's 30% is the capacity factor. 70% of their ability to generate electricity is not used because of clouds. The wind drops off, nighttime, all these things. That's why you have to have all these other energy sources backing them up around the clock. And it's just, so the efficiency of the solar panels, if I put 100% efficient solar panels on my roof, they would still only be generating, but they wouldn't be generating energy reliably around the clock. So you're hooked up to the grid, or you have to buy a bunch of batteries.
How do you feel, listening to them say, this is all old data? You've been working on this for so many years. You're so well versed in this. Ozzie, you've written.
That's actually one of the strengths of the film, because the film doesn't fall prey to what we see in so many of these didactic environmental films, where it's just like people talking about things that just happen. And this is a historical story that takes place, that starts 50 years ago and then follows Jeff through the 2008 crisis, which is when those scenes were filmed. It's very clear in the film that that's what's happening at that time. We don't pass off old data as if it's new, which is what they're trying to say that we're doing. It's a story of one person, and it still applies today, the findings of the film. And so this story of Jeff is telling a higher truth that isn't that broke through his religion, and it's a metaphor for the larger situation that we find ourselves in, and that's what makes the film so powerful. It's not old data. To characterize a story as old data is a smear tactic, and people who watch the film, I pick up on that and see that.
And people should notice, they don't want to mention that all of our charts and graphs are from the most recent year available. When you see this gigantic increase in fossil fuel production in the United States, the last period of time, that's current data. When you see that biomass is dominating the renewable energy world, biomass and hydroelectric, actually, which that's current data. When you see a solar festival a while back, early on, where I really did just go to have some fun and to chill out and just to ask some questions, when you see that the festival was not being powered by the solar panels, and then you see an Earth Day from a more recent Earth Day from a few years ago, near present, that's also saying they're being powered by solar panels, and they're not. You see Tesla, the Gigafactory, that's fairly recent, still being hooked up to the grid. You see the Apple data center that's still hooked up to the grid. They say, well, that doesn't matter. Well, it matters because they've said that you don't need all these other power plants as backup and to make the whole thing whole. So, it's a very current film, but, nobody would go see a film that was like this year's data put into graphs and charts, and it would be meaningless because it's not a story. And believe me, if we put out a movie right now with data from 2018 and 2019, they'd go, oh, we've got the next new thing coming along. And that is the very lie that's being told, that somehow there's this magic, miraculous energy source, it's this magic technology that's essentially not going to really harm the planet. And it'll soon be ours. And then we can be the good people, the chosen people, who are on the side of right and justice and wouldn't hurt a thing. And that's really, when you want to talk about racism, that is the racism right there. Because that is those of us that are well off, people like me that can afford an iPhone, and a computer and cameras and solar panels if I wanted them. It's those of us that are using this to rationalize our consumption, our hedonism, our lifestyles that for many of us, many are struggling, but there are people in this country that would make Roman emperors blush. And we're using this story of green technology to cover up our own exploitation of people around the world, species around the world, ecosystems around the world for our own frickin' benefit. That is the real racism.
And so when they talk about population control, which you don't use those words in the film, because that's what they really try to say, oh, this is racist. And it's like, no, we're the people who are saying that, especially women in poor countries where we cut off, the United States, 30 some, maybe longer years ago, any kind of family planning or help to people in the third world because of the right to life movement here. They didn't want any of that happening. And so it just seems like, how do you do it? Because this one just kills me.
This is crazy because
it's so crazy.
It's become, you're an eco-fascist if you say that women should have access to birth control around the world. If you say that we should take care of everyone with a basic standard of living, and people tend to have fewer children. I think that's what the research says. But yet,
when we end poverty, when we end the exploitation of American corporations in the third world, who use the third world people and their resources to make every damn thing that we use in our lives here in this country, that exploitation that keeps them in their place, keeps them in a way where they are not able to enjoy a standard of living that would ever come anywhere close to ours, because we would never let that happen.
You want to talk about ecofascism? Just research what's done in the name of rare earths in China, which is actually what was removed from the film, ironically. Just take a look at what's happened to those people in that landscape, working in that environment. You want to talk about ecofascism? Take a look at what's happened around the world for lithium mining. Take a look at what's happened for cobalt, for electronics. Take a look what's happened to indigenous people where land has been cleared for the growth and consumption in the Amazon. Take a look at the tribes that have been destroyed and lost their lives fighting logging and mining. Take a look in this country at the exploitation. They want to mine in the Black Hills, these sacred lands, for these minerals that we need. And why don't we have these mines here? Because they're too frickin' environmentally destructive. We're all in this together, and it's all of our consumption and expansion, capitalism and economic growth. But the ridiculousness of calling us these names, are they going to call Bindi Irwin a population control freak and an eco-fascist for talking about population and talking about women's rights? What are they going to say to Jane Goodall, who talks about population? Are they going to throw her under the bus? Or how about David Attenborough, who's long talked about population and has actually called out environmentalists for refusing to include it as part, just like we say in the film, as part of the overall expansion of all things human that's driving this forward. I attempted to, again, introduce the holistic way of looking at this. I would never talk about population separately from consumption. I think it's unethical and inaccurate. But the ridiculousness of this, in 2019, the UN study that found 1 million species in danger because of human activity, 1 million, said, I quote, "The world's population has doubled since 1970, 50 years ago, the first Earth Day. The global economy has grown fourfold, while international trade has increased 10 times over." The exact same litany of related things that we talk about in the movie. The World Wildlife Fund, in their Living Planet Report 2018, warned, "We are living through the Great Acceleration, a unique event in the 4.5 billion year history of our planet, with exploding human population and economic growth driving unprecedented planetary change through the increased demand for energy, land, and water." But you don't believe them? There's some guy called Bill McKibben who wrote a book called Maybe One, A Case for Smaller Families. And this is from his webpage describing the book. McKibben maintains that bringing one and no more than one child into this world will hurt neither your family nor our nation. Indeed, it can be a step towards an optimistic future. Bill McKibben recognizes that the transition to a stable population size won't be easy or pain-free, but ultimately is inevitable.
Wait a minute.
Wow.
Okay, wait. Yeah, hang on a second here. You're okay. We didn't know this when we were making the movie. You're telling me that all this attack on you and on this film, because of mentioning population, is racist. The people attacking the film, the acolytes of Bill McKibben and others who sort of do themselves in the film. Nothing that you do, Jeff. They just speak. You let them speak, and it's awful. And you're telling me, when did this come up? You're telling me, wait a minute. What's the book called?
Maybe One.
Meaning one child. Like just have, when did he write this book? When did this book come out?
I don't know when it came out, but it's still on his website. He hasn't disowned it, and see, I believe that they actually all know and understand the truths that are in the film. It's just that they drifted away from those. And I was so happy to see Bill McKibben go on 60 Minutes, not say a word about solar panels, not say a word about green investments. Recently. And he said that we have to deal with growth, basically. And
too much growth.
If he means that,
he doesn't. I mean, he's not talking about population growth. He's talking about the growth that corporate America, Wall Street, capitalism demands that all companies grow over their last year. Right? They've got to make more money, more profit, make more things, and the more that's done, that it intertwines itself and destroys our environment. And that's why that this film, you have to understand, opposes these people that call themselves green capitalists, because that's an oxymoron. If you are a capitalist, if you believe in that system of making a profit and exploiting the planet, because you're making a profit so that the few at the top get to be very, very rich and everybody else fights for the crumbs. You can't be an environmentalist and be a capitalist in that sense. And I think that's, Jeff, really why so many of these people are out to kill this film and shut you up, because this film is a direct hit at the way that our environmental movement has been sold out to these corporate and Wall Street interests and foundations that get their money from all sorts of things that we would all oppose. And now you're telling me this, that the very people that have been attacking you in the film for this population thing, that they've supported this idea of one child for quite some time. And
yeah, and that's not my idea. I mean, that's Bill McKibben's idea. And we didn't make a population movie. I was just trying to holistically bring up all of these factors. And I got another one for you here too. Guess who said this? We are witnessing a collision between our civilization and the earth. There are three factors causing this collision. The first one is population.
The first one is population.
Okay. The first one is population.
Okay, who are you going to tell me said this?
Al Gore in An Inconvenient Truth.
That line is in An Inconvenient Truth?
In fact, he shows a chart very similar to mine, to ours with the population increase, but he doesn't do what we did, which is to also show you the consumption. And then he doesn't do what we did, which is to start talking about, capitalism and industrialism, because he, embraced that. He also, his second point was something about technology. The technological revolution is great, but this new power also gives us a great responsibility to think about its consequences. So he actually briefly critiques technology as well. And he actually comes back around to saying, of course, that it's in the United States of America where we have this high, he doesn't use the word consumption, but we have the highest impact on the planet because of that. So he does broaden it out a bit. But yeah, it's these vicious attacks are crazy. And I think I don't know for sure. I don't know these people. I think the money and the prestige and the ego has something to do with it. But I also know that people that feel guilty and know that they're wrong sometimes scream the loudest.
Mm. Right.
And lash out those who know that we're right.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you've ripped off the mask. You've ripped off the clothes from the king, the kings of this thing. They're mostly men, by the way, that run these foundations and organizations.
And maybe it took 3 men to rip the mask off this male-dominated, white, rich, upper-class environmental movement.
Right.
3 men from Flint.
Yeah, from Flint, who were raised in the working class. And, these people are running these big groups. They're not from the working class. They're certainly not from the working class right now. And they, I have felt this. I actually just have to watch the scene with you trying to interview Bill McKibben there in the movie. And he does not want to talk to you. Who are you? You don't look like you went to Harvard like I did. This is I don't know. This has been such an eye-opener.
I still want to say something about that because I was crushed by that, that the environmental leaders and then Bill McKibben were, I was crushed by that. I was very disturbed. And even now,
the way that they blew you off, Bobby Kennedy Jr. and, all of that.
It's not the way they blew me off, the way they blew off their responsibility to just simply say, we're not going to be burning nature for green energy. Their inability to do that is what crushed me. I don't care how they treat me, frankly. I care, but it's not the point of it. But even now, if Bill McKibben coming out saying that we're, that we've got to do something about growth, meaning I believe, the expansion of the economy and that kind of growth. My hand is out. I'd like an apology. I'd like them to, to admit what they've done. But the most important thing is to move forward. And I'd like all of them to come around to, we've got to fight this beast, that's being, our total human presence is one layer of it. It's industrialism and capitalism is another layer of it. And climate change falls within that. And if I'll forgive any of them if they come around and even just ignore me and just go help us head in the right direction, because we are heading towards the cliff. And that's why I made the frickin' movie. Not because I give a rat's ass, to be honest with you, about green energy or nuclear or, I don't want to spend my time debating these things. It's because we've been in the wrong story. And unless we get in the right one, we're screwed. That's why I made this film. So
what are we going to do to get it back up so that people can see it? I mean, I just have never had this happen in my 30 years as a filmmaker, where, and this movement to take it down was started by other documentary filmmakers who are all tied in to the eco-industrial complex, the green capitalism. They have fought for 5 weeks to get this film shut down, to prevent people from seeing it. And they finally succeeded. They came up with it's a really good idea. They think they found 4 seconds that they thought violated the copyright laws, which it doesn't, by the way. And we don't put anything out without this being thoroughly vetted by our lawyers. And so we will have this. We will have it back up.
This movie is going to be available to people to watch. And if I have to drive around in my van and with the projector, people are going to see this film. And
they're not going to get away with it. That's for sure. And, hopefully we'll have it back up sometime this week.
We need an outcry. Where are our allies in the documentary world? Where are our allies in Hollywood? Where are the rights people? Because this is an expansion of censorship. This is new territory. And to be perfectly honest, take this out if you want, but I'm not a big fan of Facebook and Twitter and everybody serving as the the fact police, we've got to have a world in which people do their research. And as soon as we have these systems, YouTube, I don't know where they fell in this or what happened, but as soon as we have, the police out there deciding what stories can be told, we're in trouble.
Yeah. I want to say to both of you in closing, I've gone through this so many times. I'm used to it. Nothing surprises me anymore, even from liberals and people who say that they're on the left when they really aren't. But geez, how many years ago would that have been? 34 years ago. I was in San Francisco, Ozzie. I was working there, and I got my comeuppance from a bunch of liberal lefty types who did not want my brand of journalism from Flint. And I remember running into somebody, columnist. Actually, he was a columnist in the San Francisco Examiner, and went out one night with him for dinner, and he said, "I'm really sorry what's happened to you here in San Francisco. They've had the Flint beaten out of you." But he said the reason for that is that liberals, basically, these kind of liberals. Now I'm talking about not the people, not you who are listening to the show, but I'm talking about these elite liberals who fight anything good that comes from the working class. He said these elite liberals, they love humanity, but they just hate people. I have kept that in my head all these years, so that when I am attacked by this type, I know who they are. I know they didn't grow up the way I grew up, and I know that they, for whatever reason, they've always despised those of us who come from the place like Flint, where we come from, and that's okay. They don't have to like us, but they really don't like our politics, because we're going to call them out on things. We're not going to take shit. And that's the case with this film. This censorship, this banning of the film, they will rue the day that they did this, because I'm going to make sure that this doesn't happen again to somebody else. I mean, if they really thought they could get away with this with me, what about the next young filmmaker that comes along? What are they going to? This will have a chilling effect on them as they think about, no, maybe we better not put that in the film if we upset the liberal elites. They could stop us. They could make sure we don't get distributed, et cetera, et cetera. This can't be, because we're going to miss out on some incredible journalism and some incredible documentaries if they become at all afraid because of what they've seen that's happened to this film. So for them, really for them alone, I'm going to make sure that not only will this film be back up very shortly, so that everybody can watch it, I'm going to make sure the people that did this, and I don't mean just this little operation in the UK, but all the people that are part of the smear campaign, the attacks on this film, cowards. They couldn't just debate us. They couldn't just say, okay, we think your film is wrong and here's why. And then we'd say, well, here's what we think, and here's our backup, etc. And maybe the other side will have a good idea, and we'll go, oh, I didn't think of it that way. And maybe they would think we might have a good idea. That's not the discourse that they wanted to have happen here. They wanted to shut us the fuck down. And for the last 6 or 7 days, that's exactly what they've done. I'm apologize to the people who are listening to this, who have attempted in the past few days to go and see this film that has created such a ruckus that you can't see it. I'm sorry that there are people that think of themselves as liberals or on the left that would participate in any kind of campaign to shut this down. But you've got us, and we don't really, I don't know how to say this, speaking on behalf of Ozzie and Jeff, we don't really give a shit. Just like Jeff just implied. Seriously, if we lost, if they took us down from everywhere, we'd still make sure you see the film. Right down to they can come and friggin' arrest us if they want. You live in a free country, supposedly. What's left of it. We are not going down without a fight, and you're going to see this film. I can guarantee you that right now. So whoever's thinking about continuing to try to stop us or to take us down again, it's not going to happen. You should give up. And you better figure out what you're going to do, because now you've opened our eyes to what you're really about and who you really are and what you've done to our environmental movement. And so now the people are going to learn about that in the coming months and years, because now you're on our radar and we know that you're bad. You're bad for this country. You're bad for this planet. I wish I didn't have to say that about you. But if you would do this to us, God forbid what you would do to others, what you've probably already done to others. Who else have you shut down over the years? Where else have you taken the money? Those are facts. They're available. I'm sorry. I'll apologize now in advance. You shouldn't have fucked with us. And you shouldn't have fucked with the people listening to this podcast who'd like to watch the movie. All it is a movie, my God. Why would you risk all that you've gained from being a environmentalist? Your green capitalism. Why would you risk that over a movie? It's a movie. I'm so sorry. I am really sorry. I admired a lot of you for what you've done over the years. I'm sorry you lost your way. We'll try to make this as painless as possible. Jeff Gibbs, writer and director of Planet of the Humans, Ozzie Zehner, producer of Planet of the Humans. Thanks for taking the time here to talk about this. A lot of people have been writing and asking where's the movie? What happened? Why is there a black screen when you go to the YouTube channel? Well, we've told you here today why. And we are fighting. We have fought since day one of this film being released. And we hope that this has inspired a journalist or two to really check into what's going on, what's behind this. And that story will be told. So thank you, everybody. Jeff, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for giving us a chance to, speak. This is one of the last outlets we have, I'm sad to say.
Yeah, well, that doesn't make me happy. Thank you, though, for saying that. But we need more people doing this. Some of you who are listening need to, like I say at the beginning of every episode, thanking our one underwriter. Get your own podcast going, folks. You've got 10 people that'll listen to it, and they've got 10 people, and now suddenly you've got 100, and in a few weeks you'll have 1,000. Imagine that, talking to 1,000 people once a week. Think about doing that. And Ozzie, thank you. I'm sorry for what this has put you through.
It's my pleasure. Not all pleasure, but I signed up for it.
I'm going to say yes. That's a serious masochism going on there in San Francisco. But thank you for enlightening me on so many things and pointing me in the right direction as to what the real facts are. And I knew we'd have to put up with some crap. I didn't realize it would be actual censorship from so-called liberals. So we'll get it back up, folks. Planet of the Humans. Look for it, hopefully, in the next few days. And watch the film. Let us know what you think. It's free. We've made it available for another month now for free. So take advantage of it and make sure your friends and family get to see it too. It's only 98 minutes. You're still in semi lockdown. So you won't regret it. I'm telling you, especially your mind is going to be blown minute after minute. And speaking of minute after minute, by the way, all the things that we talked about here today, we have on the site on planetofthehumans.com, what's called our fact check Bible. We do this with every film I'm involved with, has a minute by minute footnoting of every fact that's mentioned in the film with source material that you can click on, and you can go read the facts and the backup for these facts. It's all there. They're hoping you don't know that, or that you won't do that, or whatever. But if you have any question about anything that they say that's in the film, or they make up and say it's in the film, go to the Fact Check Bible. Go to the FAQ section there on planetofthehumans.com. And we're very transparent. We put it all up there. And we'll see you. We'll see you with the movie here in the next few days. Thanks, everybody, for listening. This is Rumble with Michael Moore. I'm Michael Moore. Thank you, Jeff Gibbs. Thank you, Ozzie Zehner. And thank you to everybody out there who believes in free speech, and to everybody who's sending your support and love to the people of Minneapolis and all the other places where our fellow citizens who are African American are brutally murdered by the police month after month after month after month. This must end, and we are all committed to that. Bless you.
Absolutely.
All of you. Yes. Thank you, guys. Yeah. Thank you very much. And we'll be back here on Rumble in the next few days. Take care.